One of the things to consider about standard tenancy agreements is, I know there's HMO investors in here, you wouldn't use a standard AST for a single let and then use the same one for a HMO, would you guys? Is there any HMO landlords in here? Or are you all just not admitting? Okay, so one of the reasons why you wouldn't use the same contract is you would still use an assured shorthold tenancy, but the clauses would need to be different because HMOs normally include bills, whereas a normal tenancy on a single let would be the tenant's responsibility. And also, you need to have something in there about the communal areas, because when you're doing a tenancy on a house share, you're only doing a tenancy on one room, so not the whole of the house. So you need to consider what type of tenancy you're entering into. Some other areas where you may use a different contract. Do any of you in here have, or have you ever let to a company? Company, you have, yeah? Company lets require a completely different tenancy agreement that fall completely out of the Housing Act. So all this talk that we've talked to you about, Section 8, Section 21, none of that applies. Deposit registration doesn't apply if it's a non-Housing Act agreement. One of the most other common non-Housing Act agreements is if the landlord is resident within the property. So if you as an owner of a property rent out one of your rooms, you could not use an AST, you should use a non-Housing Act agreement because it doesn't fall under the Housing Act. So that covers what you should be considering in terms of when selecting a contract to use for your tenants. And a few things to bear in mind here about assured shorthold tenancies and the ones that with the tenancy that we're looking at currently. Just out of interest, do any of you have any tenants that have been in a property prior to 1997? The reason I ask is a landlord came to me previously and he'd had a tenant that had been in there since 1993. One of the things to consider if you're looking at buying properties with resident tenants, these years become really important because if the tenant had moved in prior to this date, then they would automatically be on an assured tenancy unless a Section 20 notice was issued to the tenant. And even more scarily, we only actually have one at the moment in our managed portfolio. If you have any tenancies that are prior to 1988, they are going to be on rent-protected tenancies, which means there are huge restrictions of ever getting that tenant out because they have succession of tenancy. We have one left of those in our managed portfolio, but I know that investors are looking to purchase these properties because they're selling cheaper because the value of them are a little bit lower. So just consider that. So this is what we're working at the moment. Guys, there's no minimum term on an AST. Most people think the minimum term on an AST is 6 months. It isn't. It can be a week, it can be a month, it can be 2 months. It can be whatever length of time you and the tenant decide for it to be. However, as you're all landlords in the room, one of the things to consider is you as the landlord cannot gain possession of that property until at least 6 months have passed if the tenants don't agree to leave at the end of contract. Does that make sense? Because we cannot use Section 21 until 4 months have passed. We now automatically, any tenancy that's created that is an AST after 1997 automatically becomes an AST, and we don't need to serve the Section 20 notice that we did up until that point. We're now entitled to possession after 2 months arrears rather than 3 months arrears. As you can see, they were trying to make it better for landlords, so they reduced the arrears. They introduced Section 21 to enable you to gain possession of your properties without the use of Section 8. And the tenant is entitled to a statement of terms within 28 days of request, but that now is all within your tenancy agreement. The tenancy agreement that they sign is their statement of terms. And there's 17 grounds for possession, which enables you now to obtain possession under 17 different things, with many more being added.